Good afternoon, good evening for those of you joining us from other sections of North America and around the globe. I'm excited to welcome you and thank you for attending the webinar ESG Sustainability Plans and Business Opportunities, Snapshot LA County. I will introduce our esteemed speaker in just a few moments. The Resilient Realism webinar series developed out of insights shared by business leaders about the current and dynamically shifting business climate during recovery from COVID-19. The conversations resulted in a white paper entitled Resilient Realism. This is LINKCO's way of giving back and sharing relevant information we learned speaking with business leaders on a day-to-day basis as part of our ongoing executive search practice. The summary of the white paper is on the LINKCO website. In the wake of COVID-19, many of the respondents have been grappling with changing business realities, economics related to their assets, products, and services, remote, hybrid workforces, and changing workspace demands and expectations, particularly now during the recovery phase from COVID-19. How to manage business risk, work product, best remote cybersecurity practices to safely protect assets and clients, environmental impacts of the pandemic, and how to evaluate and plan for climate risk, to note but a few of the insights, disruptors, and challenges discussed in the white paper and the webinars to date. Today's webinar focuses on sustainability, ESG, environmental, social, and governance plans. Does your business have one? And if you have one, what can you learn from the experiences developing and honing a plan from one of the largest counties in the US, LA County? Real business opportunities identified in the plan will be highlighted. We will continue from previous webinars unpacking the confusion about dynamically shifting expectations from clients, suppliers, and the public regarding sustainability. And stay tuned for additional webinars on this topic, as this is a rapidly changing environment and we anticipate evolving federal announcements which will be highly relevant to our conversation. Look for the links on the LINKCO website for future webinars. Just a little housekeeping. Some of you have kindly shared your questions beforehand, and those have been integrated into the webinar's Q&A format. You may also send questions and comments in the Q&A box, and if not covered already, our speaker will try to address them during the webinar. Rita Kampalath, Sustainability Program Director, Los Angeles County Chief Sustainability Office. Rita joined Los Angeles County's Chief Sustainability Office in June 2017 as a Sustainability Program Director. She supports development and implementation of the county's first sustainability plan, as well as sustainability-related policies. Prior to joining the county, Rita was the Science and Policy Director of the nonprofit Heal the Bay. Rita has also worked for Syntech Consultants on a range of water quality projects. Rita received a BS in Chemical Engineering from Columbia University and an MS in Chemical Engineering and a PhD in Civil Environmental Engineering from UCLA. And she also holds a professional engineer's degree. Let's start our conversation. Rita, would you share with us how an engineer scientist finds herself in the LA County Chief Sustainability Office?
Yeah, sure. And just to check, y'all can hear me fine, right? Teri,
yes.
Audio is good. Okay, yeah, great. Well,
great.
Thanks for having me here. It's really great and glad to see everybody's joined early on a Thursday morning. Hope everybody's New Year's off to a good start. Yeah, I love that question, Teri. I get that question a lot from other engineers and scientists who are interested in kind of making a shift over to a policy space. So it's one I've definitely reflected on a little bit. My path definitely hasn't been linear along the way. You know, like as I reflect back on my career and what was kind of driving me, I realized that, I'd always been sort of, I guess, a kind of a mission-driven person, and not satisfied with what I was doing if I couldn't sort of connect what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis with a larger sense of purpose, even if I loved the day-to-day work. And so I loved math and science, and that was one of the reasons why I got into engineering. I saw it as a way to understand the world around me. But I chose to focus on environmental topics within that because of that, wanting that sense of purpose. I kind of grew up seeing a deep connection between the health of the natural world and human health as well. Having grown up in an urban environment, looking at environmental topics was always sort of through that human lens. So, skipping forward, as I started my career as an environmental engineer, as you mentioned, I worked in the consulting space for quite a few years before I made a shift. I pretty quickly saw how policy really guided my work as an engineer. In an ideal world, there's sort of this feedback loop where science instructs policy and back and forth. Science and engineers can establish sort of what's possible and how to achieve it, and policymakers can help determine what to do within those bounds, and what our priorities are as a community. And as I, was doing my engineering practice, I realized that I wanted to be part of sort of the conversations about what should be, rather than how to get things done and what to do. So, my first step into that was, like you mentioned, joining a local nonprofit, Heal the Bay, which focuses on water resources for the non-LA natives. It's a very local nonprofit. It tends to take more of a scientific approach to its advocacy. So I joined in this title of Science and Policy Director. And that was kind of a nice balance of the two worlds. Not to get it again too, deep into like my personal thinking, but, as I got into that world with water resources, one of the things you realize when you're working on policy and working in coalitions, especially, which you do a lot in the nonprofit space, is you really just start to see the interconnectedness of a lot of these topics. So, you can say that you're working on water quality or water resources, but you pretty quickly see how water connects with food, it connects with energy, connects with housing. And so that kind of shifted my thinking to more about sustainability, which, I know we're going to talk a lot more about sustainability today, but I think kind of at the heart of sustainability is the idea of interconnectedness and balance. As you all talk about ESG, I think in a lot of the private sector, environment, social governance, we talk about environment, equity, and economy. So it's that balance and those connections are kind of key to it. So I was able to, join the sustainability office, which was great just a few years ago, and been there ever since. So I'll stop there.
I'm going to transfer control over to you, Rita. So
Yes, I was just thinking. We have a presentation.
Yeah. Slideshow. Got so excited, forgot to even put on the landing page. And while we're doing that, so you should have that now.
Yeah, there we go. I think people can see it now.
Will you tell us more about your office?
For sure.
Please?
Yeah.
Thanks.
So hopefully everybody can see the presentation landing screen right now. So as I mentioned, I've been with the county for about 5 years. That's actually as long as the office has existed. We're pretty new to the county. We were created by the Board of Supervisors, and I'll just flip forward here. We were created by the Board of Supervisors by a motion, and one of the reasons why they did that is because they kind of recognize that even though the county kind of already does a lot of things that are related to sustainability, we have our Public Works Department, we have our Parks Department, and so they kind of naturally did a lot of things that were sustainability oriented. We hadn't really expressed a comprehensive vision for what we wanted, where we wanted the county to be, and sort of what sustainability really meant to us as a county. That was really important because, so many of our sustainability challenges, again, I was talking about interconnectedness, that might be like a theme through this, because so many of these challenges really cut across the core missions of a lot of our departments. An example that comes up a lot is urban trees. Trees are managed by our Public Works Department in roadways. We also have parks in parks. We have trees in our parks and natural spaces. We also have trees in our buildings, just in our private spots. That's how we manage those, and the needs of those things, and what our goals are in terms of urban trees and urban tree canopy. That's something that a lot of departments touch on. And so I think what the board was realizing was that until we sort of articulated a shared vision for those sustainability issues, we wouldn't really be able to make sure that we're coordinated, and even avoid sometimes doing things that may be at cross purposes with some of these goals in different departments. So our mission statement is up on the slide. I won't read that, but basically in general, we are a sustainability shop. We're a small group that focuses on policy development and supporting, providing advice to departments as well as the Board of Supervisors. We also work very closely with our colleagues in departments to actually implement programs and projects and things like that. But as I mentioned, when we were first formed 5 years ago, our main charge was to create the county's first sustainability plan, which is our county plan.
Right. And so maybe you will tell us more, please, about what, not maybe, please tell us more about what went into creating the sustainability plan. I've been so impressed in our discussions leading up to the webinar in the thoughtful process that that you all went through.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was definitely a huge effort. It felt quite fast as we were doing it. We started off in 2017, and then the plan was adopted in 2019 by the Board of Supervisors. But there were a lot of different elements and process that went into that. So, I mean, I will start off by saying again, that we're a small shop of only about 6 people now. We were supported in all of our work by a really great consulting team, as well as our colleagues at the county departments. Again, because sustainability covers such a broad range of topics, we needed to have access to a lot of different expertise in a variety of topics. So, our consulting team included researchers from UCLA, for instance, to, make sure that we were getting sort of like cutting edge data and understanding of sustainability topics. But we also had experts on topics like transportation, public health, economy and workforce development, just to name a few. Just to, that was certainly a goal, making sure that the plan was comprehensive, like I said. But in addition to that, this kind of like summarizes some of like our main thinking with the plan as we were creating it. Aspirational was a key part of it. We wanted to make sure that we were, being ambitious in terms of like the vision that we were setting forth, not, kind of going beyond where we were currently and really thinking about what a sustainable LA looks like. At the same time, balancing that with being actionable. We didn't want this to be a plan that just kind of looks nice and sounds good, but we can't really make a lot of good progress on. So that was key. We wanted it to be long term. So you'll see that there are goals that are set out as far as 2045 and 2050, as well as shorter terms and medium term goals along the way. That's important for accountability, of course. And then we wanted it to be regional. So, we talked about how sustainability cuts across topics and departments. It also cuts across jurisdictions, right? In LA County, again, for the folks who aren't local, we are an enormous contiguous urban setting. We have our unincorporated areas, which are about 1 million people all by itself. But we also have 88 cities. The city of LA, obviously, everybody knows. That is about 4 million out of a total of 10 million people in the county. So none of these sustainability challenges really follow jurisdictions necessarily. So our air quality problems are across the region. Rivers and watersheds obviously cut across. So we really felt that if we were going to address these sustainability issues in a real way, we needed to be thinking regionally about how to solve those problems and thinking about partnerships as well. So just to touch briefly on, again, a little bit more detail on what the plan covers. As I mentioned, we wanted to think about sustainability in a comprehensive way, and not just like sort of traditional topics. So, like water, energy, air quality, but also really thinking about the other two pieces of sustainability that maybe sometimes get a little bit of less attention, but equity and economy and workforce development, like the human health element of it was really important, again, in such an urban setting as LA. So we have things like public health and well-being, we have housing. I mentioned on the side here too that equity and resilience are, of course, key parts of sustainability. And we felt that those couldn't be relegated to just a chapter, but really needed to be woven throughout the plan. Again, especially relevant to a place like LA, where we have deep inequities. If you kind of picture again, I'm originally from Texas, and I always like to reflect back on, how I viewed LA before I came here. And it always strikes me how disparate the visions are in media and things like that. You've got Hollywood and beaches. You've also got, high crime and homelessness and things like that. So all of that exists in one place, and it is a reflection of the deep inequities that our communities deal with every day. So this was a really critical part of the plan. Just one more thing, just to dig a little bit deeper in that, because I know that people throw around the word equity a lot without really defining it. So it was very important for us in the plan to actually have a concrete definition of what equity meant. And I'll just say that we took this work from a lot of previous academic work, including a project that was done by a coalition that our office is a part of called the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, that was really looking at what equity means in the context of sustainability. And so they defined equity as generally as an end state in which all groups have access to the resources and opportunities necessary to improve the quality of their life. And of course, we differentiate that from everybody having the same stuff. It really is about ensuring that people have enough to reach like sort of an end goal that is fair and just. And so we kind of divide equity into sort of these four ideas. And we like to really think intentionally about building all of these pieces of equity into the sustainability plan. So one of them is procedural equity. So looking at our processes, so ensuring that we are authentically engaging groups and representing voices, especially voices that are typically underrepresented in sustainability spaces. And, looking at those processes that are used to develop plans and policies. Distributional equity, this comes up a lot too, as we're, looking at resources. So are our programs designed in a way that results in a fair distribution of benefits and burdens? So not just resources, but also where are the environmental and pollution burdens going? Are we ensuring that we're not just kind of taking the approach of letting things fall where they may, which is what has happened before, so that we have like industrial facilities and things like that tend to be in lower income neighborhoods. Are we intentionally addressing that? Structural equity, of course, so looking at the way that our institutional structures can lead to current inequities. And then finally, and sorry if this is a bit cut off here. Oh, there we go.
No, you can see
transgenerational equity, which I think is a really good and important one as we think about sustainability and especially climate change. So thinking about how the decisions that we're making now may impact future generations, and ensuring that we're not doing something that's providing a great high quality life for our communities now, but is ultimately going to result in burdens for future generations to have to deal with. So I will pause there, Teri, just on that.
Good. And also let me just encourage our attendees to send in your questions, and we will try to incorporate them. My next question zeroes in on the plan in terms of its very purposeful efforts, as you expressed with the equity example, in defining what is within and outside your parameters, and
Right.
zeroing in on goals, strategies, and actions. Would you explain why your team understood this to be critical for your plan? And would you also comment about engaging with stakeholders?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
So, yeah, I talked a little bit about why we felt the need to take this regional approach, just the importance of recognizing that a lot of our sustainability problems go beyond our boundaries. But, part of taking that approach meant that we really needed to recognize and be transparent about the fact that as the county, we can't do everything. Not everything is in our control. One of the many reasons why it's great to be talking to audiences like that, like this, all of you in different sectors aside from local government outside of the county. It was also really important to acknowledge that in order to be accountable to stakeholders and kind of signal also that we were interested in partnerships with agencies and other stakeholders. I mentioned, in a previous part of the slide, we talked about, and I can flip back for a second here, where we had direct control and where we had influence. And that's something that I'll talk a little bit more specifically about specific actions, but we were very intentional about sort of designating which actions in the sustainability plan were things that were directly under the county's control and where we should be held accountable for making progress on them, and where we really needed to be looking at partnerships with, as I said here, regional agencies, cities and state, but also the private sector and the public as well to help us achieve different goals. So as you said, we had to be very intentional about that. There were a lot of different elements that went into creating the plan. Like I said, getting expert support and input from the team and colleagues and departments. But as you mentioned, stakeholder engagement was very, very key to the whole process. In fact, I'd say it was almost just as much of a focus of the process as the internal side of the development going along. It was a large part of that, couple of years, roughly 1.5 to 2 years that we took to develop the plan. And so, that was important to us because we wanted to be able to say that this was a plan that was built on the priorities and feedback of our residents and stakeholders. And also just getting back to the idea of partnerships and the need for collaboration. We wanted our stakeholders to feel that they had ownership over the plan to some extent, because that's one of the ways that you keep people engaged and keep them bought in and kind of, foster those relationships as well. So to that end, before we started writing, we started our stakeholder engagement process before we had anything on paper, really. So we had this series of workshops that were designed to really gather broad input about priorities and actions. And then a lot of the work that our team did next was really to take all of that input and start to organize it and shape it into something that was sort of coherent. As you mentioned, we had to do a lot of thinking about how to structure the plan, since we were, again, starting from scratch, and what to include and what to not include. I can share a few takeaways from that process. One was that, as we started to really look at that feedback, we recognized the need to really capture the cross-cutting nature of a lot of the feedback that we were getting. So, we didn't get feedback that fell neatly into those topic areas like water. This is what you need to do on water. This is what you need to do on air quality and things like that. We were really discussing what a vision for what a sustainable LA looks like. And what it means for communities, again, and for our region to be sustainable. So ultimately, so I'll talk a little bit about what's specifically in the plan. What we ended up with was articulating sort of these high-level vision statements, which ultimately ended up being the organizing structure for the plan. So you'll see it's kind of funny because we don't have a water goal. We don't have, or a water chapter, rather. We don't have an air quality chapter. Instead, we have these goal statements, which we use to organize them. So I won't read all of these. There's 10 of them, actually. But for instance, resilient and healthy community environments where residents thrive in place. A prosperous LA County that provides opportunities for all residents and businesses and supports a transition to a cleaner economy. Accessible parks and public lands. One that always gets a lot of attention is a fossil fuel-free LA County. And this was something that was necessary in order to support our carbon neutrality commitments in LA County. Also, a sustainable and just food system. So, as we started organizing this feedback we received into these different buckets, I'll say we did get a ton of feedback. I mean, 500 plus 1,000 individual comments from our stakeholders. But, there was a lot of overlap. And, some of the ways we used a lot of different lenses again to look at them. So, we wanted to look at, for instance, what the county has already done. Stakeholders, one of the things that was really interesting was stakeholders weren't always aware of what we had accomplished. And so some of the feedback we were getting were things that we had already done. They just weren't aware of. We also wanted to look at, kind of reflect on these vision statements and kind of identify where we knew we had gaps, and prioritize the actions based on what we thought were, for instance, most impactful, most urgent. And, like I said, we were interested in partnerships. We didn't want to limit ourselves just to what the county could do, but we also wanted to balance that with making sure that we could be held accountable for our plan. We didn't want a plan that was just full of stuff that we didn't have control over, because that would obviously, look like we were sort of passing a responsibility off to others. So it was really all of those different elements which went into just kind of creating the plan that we did. And so, as I mentioned, we started off with these goals, just to go into a little bit more of the structure of the plan.
Yes,
From
please
there,
do.
we tiered
Thank you.
down into strategies, which were a little bit more specific. And then from strategies into like more specific actions. You'll still see that, the sustainability plan isn't a roadmap, like a step-by-step instruction manual on how to achieve things. It still really does present a strategic vision. So there's a lot of work, which I'll talk a little bit about more in terms of implementation that we need to do. But this is just an example. So for instance, that goal about a prosperous LA County, a strategy within that would be to promote inclusive growth across the changing economy. So again, capturing the idea that, we want an inclusive economy. We want one that supports families, but we also need to look at how we transition into a cleaner economy. And then a specific action that we have out of there is leading or supporting a regional green chemistry or clean manufacturing incubator. And then just, again, digging a little bit farther into those specific actions, as I mentioned, each action is categorized according to a few different things. So one is horizon. Like I said, the plan overall is pretty long-term, with the farthest actions out to, I think, 2050. But we did want to make sure that we had a mix of those long-term, medium-term, and short-term actions. So with this one, this is a medium-term one, which is roughly on the order of 2035 is where we were looking at the horizon. The short-term is like 2025. Then, as I said, sphere of influence. So this is one that we do feel like we could directly launch something like this. Obviously, there's a lot of work that would go into it, but it is something that the county could do on its own. We also have lead county entities, even for our indirect actions. This is, again, going back to the idea of building in accountability to the plan. So each action is assigned a lead department. We also named some partners. Mainly, I'll say that we focused on public sector partners, because we didn't kind of want to call out private sector or specific nonprofits. Again, we didn't feel like we could do that without getting their buy-in to that. And then, topic tags, because we understand that, some people do want to search for things based on topics. So that's how each action is categorized.
Rita, before we continue, take a look at the question that Jennifer asked. And we may want to put that to a little bit later when we're talking about more specific, but I just wanted you to take a look now. Before I go on to my next question, would you take a minute and just talk about the stakeholders? How did you determine who they were, who you were reaching out to, and was part of that self-defined?
Yeah, that was so self-defined, you mean in terms of the stakeholders themselves?
Yes.
Yeah, so some of it was, again, what we did, that was part of the benefit of having this very diverse and large team that we had. We did a huge brainstorm around who it should be on the stakeholder list, right? So we wanted to do specific outreach to a number of organizations. We had multiple tiers of the stakeholder engagement. So as I mentioned, we had this series of workshops that were before the plan was even written. And with that, we really reached out to folks that kind of were already familiar with some of these topics because we did want to have sort of an informed discussion, but it was a broad range of stakeholders. So we kind of bucketed them into different sectors. So we did have like sort of a nonprofit series of workshops in academia, but we also did private sector and partner agencies who would have a stake in our region. But it was a massive list. I would also say we didn't close it off. These weren't closed workshops, so we were definitely open to people suggesting other organizations that should be a part of it, sending the invitations out. But that was a huge effort, is just kind of developing those stakeholder lists and making sure that we were including people.
Right.
I would also say that kind of a key part of the workshop, again, was we had partnerships with individual community-based organizations because we did really want to bring in that equity lens. And so in order to do that, we knew that we had to be very intentional about bringing, sort of those equity-focused voices to the table. So we actually provided stipends to stakeholders who were particularly focused on equity, because we knew we were kind of asking them to step outside of what their core mission was to give us input on the sustainability plan. So we felt that it was fair to compensate them for their time, both to attend the meetings and also sort of get up to speed on some of these topics. So that was a part of it. So it was kind of a balance of like, we had a list, we allowed people to self-select. And, of course, there are people who are always very engaged in these topics who are going to want to come and they're going to hear about it and they're going to know about it. We also made an effort to very intentionally reach out to stakeholders who wouldn't necessarily have heard about it and wouldn't necessarily see an invitation to a sustainability workshop and say, oh yeah, that's relevant to me, I should join. So there was a lot of work that went into that, like just in terms of like sometimes even individual calls to organizations and saying like, hey, this is what we're trying to do, this is what we're trying to achieve. We intentionally sent that invite to you because we want you to take part, even though your focus is, housing or racial justice or anything like that. We want your voice to be part of the table. The other thing that I would say is like there was a whole other side of it that was aimed at the general public, but we didn't feel that it would be worthwhile to do that until we had a draft to bring people. So we actually used partnerships with community-based organizations to bring residents and the general public to like sort of larger summit style, like kind of family friendly weekend events. And that was once we had a draft in place. And sorry, that was kind of all over the place, but it was a very big process. And I'm happy to answer more specific questions about how that process went. But it was definitely a very involved plan to, again, sort of expand our stakeholder base beyond sort of the usual suspects of who take part in these kinds of plans.
I think that the next question that we had in our queue has been touched upon, the balance between the aspirational and pragmatic. Is there something else that you want to comment on that, or shall we go on to the next question?
Yeah, I think that we've touched on that. I would just say, like, I think that we wanted, we really wanted people to be excited about the vision that we were putting out. And so that's why it was kind of important to like really bring in that aspirational side. I will talk more about like some of the specific goals. And, as we were getting feedback on the plan, we certainly heard from people like, how are you? This is really a lot. And it's going far from where the county is sort of at baseline. We were like, if we put something out that was just kind of like a step above what we were already doing, who would want to be a part of that? I think one of the greatest challenges with sustainability that we have, like kind of writ large, like in an overall sense, is really like apathy and cynicism. The sense that people either can't have control over some of these issues or that they just kind of give up because it's not, And so I think like putting out like something that's inspirational, that really creates a vision of where we want to be, can help combat that. So I think that was a really important part of what we were doing. I remember when I was reading one of the final drafts of the plan, looking at the whole thing kind of coming together and just being like, I'd want to live there. Like this is a county that I would want to live in, you know? And I hope that other people have that same reaction. And that was, I think, what we were kind of trying to inspire as well. So
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. So, would you describe and give examples of how you have been collecting data, measuring, and reporting on your metrics? And would you please highlight key takeaways, lessons learned that businesses should consider as they develop and implement their own sustainability ESG plans, particularly in regard to data management and metrics?
yeah, absolutely. And so I will just start off by saying that that's something that we're still working through ourselves. And I think that's probably going to be one of my takeaways and lessons learned. I'd say first of all, it was really important for us for the plan to be data driven. As I said, it was aspirational, but it was very important for us, even for those aspirations, to be based on kind of an understanding of like a baseline, and where we were hoping to get to. So, we did kind of create these actions and goals based on a vision of what we wanted to see. But we also knew that it was very important for us to be able to measure progress. How do we actually know if we've become a sustainable region? What does that mean in a measurable sense? And so we did develop a set of indicators that are actually available on what's called the county's open data portal. So that's available if people want to kind of poke through that. So we used that data. It's a broad sense of indicators. I'm going to mess up the actual number, but I think it's something on the order of like 40 to 50 different indicators. And we use that data to set our eventual targets as well, so that we kind of knew what our baseline was and we could determine where we wanted to go. I guess a couple of things that we learned is as we were going through that exercise, and I'll start first. We had some criteria when we were determining those indicators. Kind of key ones were that, we knew we didn't have the time to create our own data sets. So we were going to rely on work that was already out there. We knew we wanted to be able to update these things regularly, be able to measure progress. So it was important that we used data indicators that we knew were going to be updated like on an annual basis, or semi-frequently, 1 to 2 years. And then we wanted to make sure that it was something that was publicly available as well, because we also wanted to be able to provide that data to our stakeholders and jurisdictions. That was actually another goal of the plan, was to be able to provide disaggregated data to the cities within the county. We have, again, as I said, 88 cities. We have some that are far ahead of us on sustainability. We also have some very small cities that don't have resources to have a sustainability team or anything like that, but they'd like to, So one of the key tools and one of our key goals was to kind of actively engage cities and provide them with tools where we can, to sort of create these kinds of plans for themselves. So as we were kind of using that criteria to look at data sets, we realized there were a lot of data gaps. There were a lot of data sets that we would have loved to have, that, just didn't exist, or maybe they weren't measured regularly enough, or they weren't publicly available. So I'll also note that on our website, there is a memo that summarizes these data gaps, because we wanted to be very transparent about that, what we would have liked to know. Especially if some of that would catch the eye of partners or researchers who might want to be able to try to fill those data gaps. We also, frankly, recognized that it was important, and this is more something in the implementation side, I would say. Data management can be a full-time job, right? It's also very easy, as important as we recognize it is, for it to like fall by the wayside, especially as you're super focused on implementation, and you have a small team like we do. And I think most sustainability offices, even in the private sector, are quite small. It's very easy for the data tracking side to sort of, be a lower priority. And so, one thing that we realized, we started off to saying, let's measure everything. We're now going through a process of sort of reevaluating our indicator set, and try to like really kind of tailor it down to what we now kind of recognize to be like the most important pieces to understand. That's very much work in progress, so we're not there yet. So I'll just be very frank. We actually, and this is not just because of priorities, but obviously priorities and resources shifted with the pandemic. We haven't been able to update our data set since, it's 29. It's been a couple. We would have updated it once or twice in the intervening time. We haven't been able to do that yet, just because of that. So, resource needs. So, and at the same time, I would say that is one of the things we get asked about most frequently by external stakeholders is like, hey, can we have access to this data set? So it is something that's very important to partners and something that we can provide. So, it's something that we want to focus on. We're trying to tackle that issue going forward.
Thanks. So I think finally we're going to be able to get to the question from earlier and combine it with this next set. How did you define your actions process, and would you comment on the progress and business opportunities on a few of them? And it would be great if we could start with the climate vulnerability assessment, which is just so super impressive. But then I have a whole list here of different ones, and perhaps you'll be able to talk about our question from Jennifer. And then there's a few others too. So
that'd be great. And so I actually had a few slides with some actions on it. So I'd love to just flip through those to give people a sense of some of the other actions. Kind of, I think it gives a sense of like sort of the scope of the plan. And then I can talk about some more specific ones. But I picked like a sprinkling of these, which I thought were interesting and again captures sort of the scope. I'm not going to read all of them, but just so you know, we have actions related to, fostering the green good movement, technologies and partnering. We have the Green Zones program, which is something that we have actually made progress on. Our regional planning department is leading that one. Drinking water affordability. I saw there was a question about water. I'm happy to talk a little bit more about that. Yeah. Developing a comprehensive heat island mitigation strategy. Urban forest management plan. That's again something I'm happy to talk about because we were actually able to secure a grant from the state, and so we're starting that process to develop an urban forest management plan soon. Just transition plan. This is in support of some of that moving away from fossil fuels for the county. Countywide biodiversity index. Collaborating with local tribes, that's another interesting one. We had a whole set of stakeholder workshop that was focused on local Native American tribes. And then civic art, which I think is interesting. The need for the role of art as supporting community health and well-being, obviously, I think is something that's not always well supported or discussed in sustainability plans, but it's definitely something that's very important. And I'll flip through these quickly, but single-use plastics, water conservation. Again, I think that was one of the questions was.
Yeah.
Let me just stop there because this is a lot, but I know you'd asked about specific progress. So I actually didn't include here the action about the climate vulnerability assessment, but there was an action there is an action in the sustainability plan that called for us to create a climate vulnerability assessment, both for social vulnerability and also for physical infrastructure vulnerability. And that was capturing the idea that, we understand that climate change is happening. Everybody understands that we need to start planning for it and designing projects around it. But we were realizing that we didn't have a good understanding of what were the most vulnerable areas in the county, both in terms of our physical infrastructure, like our utilities, our wastewater treatment plants, you name it, but also on the community side. So what parts of our community, our residents, are really going to be the most affected by climate hazards? So that was one of the first things that we needed to do because we really felt that assessment would sort of underpin everything else we did. And so we, are proud to say that we completed that assessment late last year. There is a report again on our website that you can take a look at. It is just an assessment. It's not a strategic plan for how to solve issues, but it does, again, highlight key areas and key, parts of our community and our residents who are particularly vulnerable. And so that's really helpful and it's been really interesting.
That's great, and I think that really ties in well to, Jennifer and Larry's, questions. Jennifer asks, she'd love to hear more about the water bucket. What kind of circular strategies are being looked at? For example, implementing a laundry to landscape irrigation system for new residential homes or curb cutting so stormwater irrigates. And then Larry's asking, what is LA County doing to directly address climate change? When do all county buildings become net zero energy? When does the county fleet become 100% EV or hydrogen fueled? When does the county stop putting garbage into landfills?
Yeah, great questions. Lots of questions. I don't know if we have time to answer all of them, but I will try to do my best. Okay, so on the water bucket, I am, yeah, as you know, a water nerd, so I'll try to like keep my answer short here. So in terms of laundry to landscape, we did recently, I think in the past couple of years, we were able to adopt some ambitious building codes that at least require new buildings to be gray water ready, which is I think what you're referring to. We recently also submitted a report to our board on what the county can do to further water conservation, especially in the face of the current drought. Because we also think that water conservation is something that is like sort of under invested in. A lot of agencies tend to look at the supply side, really focus on how do we get more water versus the demand side. So, one of the things that I would love for us to do is really look more into sort of institutionalizing some of those demand cuts. So like you said, making sure that our stormwater is irrigating trees and plants, moving more to native drought tolerant landscape. One of the things that I'm excited about, which I'm hoping that we can move forward on, is a ban on what's called ornamental turf or non-essential turf. Basically, if the only reason why you step on the grass is to mow it, then it is not serving a purpose. So we're not talking about like soccer fields necessarily. We're talking about things in parkways or stuff like that, where we're pouring a tremendous amount of potable water on those areas and it's not really going forward. In terms of curb cutting, we have Measure W, which is looking at making greater use of our stormwater. I will also say that we're looking at, the interplay between water and trees through our urban forest management plan. As I said, that process is just kicking off, rather. It's going to kick off it's going to be complete over the next couple of years. I kind of talked about, where we can sort of be at cross purposes, and water conservation and trees is a great example of that. In the last drought, departments were asked to cut a lot of water, and that ended up damaging the health of trees in some cases, like the drought restrictions that were put in place because they weren't at least initially designed with an eye to maintaining our urban forest. Yeah. So this is something that we need to look at. I think that we need to be a lot more ambitious, frankly, about not just looking at opportunity areas for tree planting, but also increasing area for tree planting. So looking at curb cuts and pavement removal and things like that. Those things tend to be a little bit more expensive, but I think it's somewhere where our urban forest management plan can be really great for starting to like push the bounds of how we think about where we put trees and how we water them. So I'll stop there in the interest of time.
Okay.
In terms of climate change, wow, yeah. So as I said, there's a whole goal in the sustainability plan about becoming a fossil fuel free county. And I would say climate is one of the things that is an underpinning of the entire sustainability plan. So, the shift away from fossil fuels is a huge one. You might have seen in the past few months, the Board of Supervisors actually took incredibly ambitious action to end oil drilling in the county. There's a lot of work that we're doing in terms of our EV fleet. We have a fleet policy that was adopted probably a couple of years ago to start moving the county fleet to 100% EV or at least hybrid. But I think the default is to go for EVs unless there's some need, like in heavy duty vehicles where there may be less options available. Also proud to say we one of the things that Gary Drew, our chief sustainability officer, did when he first started at the county was to help create the Clean Power Alliance, which is a community choice aggregation. It's a new utility that unincorporated areas and some cities are now using instead of Edison. And one of the goals there has been to set defaults for high renewable energy. And so I'm happy to say that I think, I believe now, our county buildings are on 100% renewable energy. And with our unincorporated areas, I believe that's the default, or they may be shifting to that. So energy, unfortunately, is not my area of expertise, so I might be not clear on these timelines, but they are trying to move to a shift where the default for all customers on unincorporated is 100% renewable. And again, for county buildings, we have adopted that. So yeah, there's tons of work. And then you talked about garbage into landfills. We do have some very ambitious goals around that. Our Public Works Department leads what's called the Roadmap to a Sustainable Waste Future, which does have a goal of they stated as over 95% diversion from landfills by, I believe, 2045. And so, a lot of work to be done to get there, obviously, but, that's our goal. We're working towards it. We've got a lot of work going on related to organics diversion, particularly. And as I mentioned, plastics. So, we've got a lot of priorities and initiatives that are underway.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about the famous organics diversion? Just like touch on it, or should we just continue because it's
Yeah, I know we're running short of time.
13
Yeah,
minutes?
so the state passed. This audience may know the state passed a law, SB 1383, which established some very ambitious targets for organics diversion, and that again. Very much driven by a desire to reach carbon neutrality and avoid these like short-lived climate pollutants, as they're called, especially methane. So methane in particular. And so the county has been very busy trying to figure out capacity, passing ordinances to create collection systems to require commercial and residential eventually businesses to to collect and divert their organic waste for composting and anaerobic diversion. So a lot of work underway. That was very vague, but yes, there's too hard to summarize in a minute, but
Yeah.
I'm happy to talk more about that.
Yes, and we may just have to find another session if you'd be agreeable.
Yeah, and I'm also happy to pass on. I can create a list of links. I saw there's an
Yeah,
ask for a link to the indicators.
please,
If you have a way to follow up with the audience, Teri, I'm happy to
happy
create
to
like a set of lists that I referenced and pass that on.
yes, I'm happy to do that, and I can include it on the website too. So
Great.
getting back to the private sector and the public, um, what would you consider opportunities, low-hanging fruit, where either people on this webinar who are going to be listening to this or looking over the plan can say, this is a real opportunity. This is really a way where I can beneficially work on sustainability issues, benefit my county or the county if it's a company from afar who's
Mhm.
looking at this area as an opportunity. Would you identify maybe some of that, how businesses can get involved? And then I want to also just touch on the upcoming Olympics impact on your plan. So, and we only have like 3 more
Yeah, of
minutes
course.
before I
I'll
need
make
to
it quick.
close.
Yeah, thanks. So, you know, um, I would just say, again, the sustainability plan is so broad, and I think it really depends on what sector you work in, what your expertise is. As we like to say, sustainability is an all hands on deck project. It's not necessarily about, shifting your focus and doing something different, but it's looking at how you can build sustainability into your own practice and business. And so I think it very much depends on what sector you're in. Um, you know, I think, we've talked about collaboration and partnerships so much. And, we sort of focused on decision makers with this plan. But, I think the private sector has a lot of advantages over us as government. I think that companies can be much more nimble, than us. They can lead their way in sectors. And I think, oftentimes they're much more expert in terms of their own processes and manufacturing and things like that. I also think the private sector, especially with product manufacturers and designers, have this really great role to play, because we do need behavior change from consumers and residents. And I like to think that consumers would like to make sustainable choices if they know what they are, but those choices need to be available. And so I think that the private sector has a lot of really great role and a lot of power in that sense to create more sustainable choices and more transparent choices for consumers and make those choices a little bit easier. Similarly, as I was talking about with science and policy, I think innovators and entrepreneurs have the same role where they can have that feedback loop again with us as policymakers by moving the goalposts about what's possible and what's feasible through innovation. And then we, in terms policymakers, can help support businesses who are trying to be more sustainable by leveling the playing field through policy decisions, and again serving as an incubator. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for collaboration. So we mentioned some of the things that are very actively in the works and actively being implemented, like SB 1383, this move away from fossil fuels, the shift to electrification. I think those are areas where there's going to be a lot of growth on the private sector. The private sector side, again, and water conservation. Drought is not going to go away. And I think there's going to be much more of a need to sort of measure and track progress, and people are going to be more interested in tracking their water use. So I think those are all areas that are very relevant. But again, I would challenge people to really look at how sustainability would apply very specifically to what they're doing and try to build it in there. We of course welcome businesses to be involved in our stakeholder processes and also to come talk to us about their ideas and what they're working on. Like I said, we set annual priorities for ourselves in terms of what subset of these actions we're going to work on. But, the entire plan has been adopted by the Board of Supervisors as their official policy on sustainability. So we've absolutely had people, especially on the nonprofit side or other agencies, say, hey, we're working on this. Would you like to support us or collaborate in some way? And we're like, that's great. Sounds great. So, encourage people to look at the plan and see how it might apply to them too, and come to us if they have ideas as well.
Great. Just 1 second on the Olympics, and then I want to ask you one final question and close.
Okay, sounds great. Yeah, so with the Olympics, I'll say that we were pretty involved early on, thrilled to see that their platform is really based on sustainability. I think the Olympics is going to be interesting. It's going to be like a microcosm of a city, and I think they'll be able to sort of pilot and demonstrate some really innovative ways to manage our problems. I understand that they're going to do a lot of work to go as waste-free as possible, shift to reusables, in terms of how they're thinking about housing and transportation. So we have worked closely. We worked closely with that team early on, and we're starting to hear a little bit more from them as they're starting to implement. We would, we're just looking forward to partnering with them and, talking about how they may be able to act on and show that some of our actions and priorities are possible to achieve, at least on a small scale. I'll also say that, the plan is due for an update, and it will be updated before the Olympics comes to us. So I have no doubt that there'll be stakeholders, and we'll be having further discussions with them as we start to update those actions and targets, and see what might be relevant, where the ball is moved and we need to be more ambitious, or hopefully gotten some things done and we can take them off the list. So
thank you. Last question, and then I'm going to just summarize and close.
Sure.
What has helped you and your family maintain your sanity and thrive during COVID?
Ooh, yeah. So that's a hard one. I will start off by saying that my family has been incredibly lucky. We had the same challenges that I think everybody dealt with. Homeschooling was a big one, obviously. But because I've got 2 small kids, but other than that, just the ability to be able to work from home and maintain our jobs and our health was critical. So I will caveat that with that. But I would say for us, it was really important to sort of maintain a sense of community. So, we were able to stay in touch with a small bubble of friends. That was critical for us, for our sanity. Also, just felt very lucky to live in LA. Sorry for the folks who live in colder climates, more urban settings, but I think one of the impact of the pandemic was really to like sort of shrink our world. It all felt very small, even though it was a very global pandemic. Just being stuck at home, your circle of friends getting smaller, who you could see, and so just being able to access nature, like beaches, remind yourself that there's this much bigger world than you was really incredible, and definitely helped keep us sane. So we definitely did a lot of visits to the beach, hikes. Also lots of Netflix and YouTube, I'm going to be honest, but but it was all those were some of the things we relied on.
And thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Rita, I want to thank you for generously sharing your time and expertise to address these critical ESG sustainability plan best practices. Your insights into the planning process, stakeholder engagement, metrics, lessons learned, and business opportunities offer us pragmatic models as each of us grapple with how to build and implement our own sustainability plans. Rita's slides, along with a summary and a recording link to this webinar, will be posted on the LINKCO website. The recording will be posted on the LINKCO YouTube channel. Stay tuned via our website and LinkedIn for announcements about upcoming webinars. And at the end of the webinar, please take a minute to fill out the survey. It will help us evaluate and improve our series going forward. LINKCO Executive Search provides elite companies with top CXOs and upper management nationwide using a proprietary step-by-step process for both clients and candidates. We are on 24/7, 365. When you need help, please call upon us. Thank you for joining and stay safe.